This morning, as I was getting ready to go to the shopping mall, I never imagined that a chance encounter would forever change the way I see my life, my family, and the decisions I have made over all these years. Sometimes the truth comes disguised as a warning, and we are too blind to see it until it hits us head-on. It all began 2 years ago when Henry fired Sebastian, our chauffeur of nearly 20 years. Sebastian was not just an employee, he was part of our family, or at least I thought so. He had driven our children to school throughout their childhood and had accompanied me to countless doctor's appointments. He had been present in moments of joy and sorrow. He knew our lives better than many of our own relatives. But for Henry, Sebastian made an unforgivable mistake. He forgot to pick him up from the airport one night because his young son had an emergency. It was nothing serious, thank heavens, but the boy had a high fever, and Sebastian had rushed to the hospital without a second thought. By the time he finally managed to contact Henry to explain, it was too late. My husband had taken a cab home, furious, feeling his trust had been betrayed. The next morning, Sebastian was fired without a second thought, without his full severance, without a letter of recommendation, without even a conversation that would allow for an explanation. That is Henry's way. When he feels someone has disappointed him, he closes the door and throws away the key. There are no second chances in his world, only absolute loyalty or total banishment. I tried to intercede. I begged Henry to reconsider, to think of the years of faithful service, of the extenuating circumstances. But he looked at me with that coldness I have learned to recognize and told me, "Blondie, do not meddle in my business decisions. You do not understand how the real world works." Those words hurt more than he could ever imagine because they perfectly summarized what our marriage had become. An arrangement in which I existed only as decoration, as the perfect wife who organized elegant dinner parties and smiled in photographs, but whose opinion held no real value. However, this time I decided to act. For the first time in decades, I chose not to remain silent and submissive. Only my rebellion was quiet, invisible to Henry. I sought out Sebastian and began to help him financially. Not large sums that could be detected in our bank accounts, but small amounts that I saved from my personal expenses, money for his children's school, for medical bills, so he could stay afloat while looking for another job. I never told anyone, not my children, not my friends, and of course, never Henry. It was my secret, my small way of compensating for my husband's cruelty, my way of feeling that I still had some humanity in a world that had become so cold. Sebastian never stopped thanking me. Every time we met for me to give him the money, his eyes would fill with tears he tried to hide. He would tell me that I had saved his life, that without that help, his family would have fallen into despair. But I always replied the same. "Sebastian, this is the least I can do. You were part of our family for years. I am not going to forget that." This morning, when I left the house for the mall, everything seemed normal. Henry was in his study, busy with his business calls as always. My 2 children, Marshall and Diana, have been living their own lives for years, each in their own city, each wrapped up in their own worlds, where I exist only as a blurred figure in the background of their childhood memories. Henry's new chauffeur, a young, silent man who barely exchanged words with me, dropped me off at the entrance to the mall. I went inside, did some unenthusiastic shopping for clothes I did not need, and accessories for a house that was already full of things empty of meaning. It is funny how one can fill physical spaces while emotional spaces remain devastatingly empty. When I came out 3 hours later with my bags in hand, I expected to see Henry's car waiting for me in the pickup area, but instead I saw Sebastian. He was standing next to a modest car, looking at me with an intensity I had never seen in his eyes before. I approached, confused. "Sebastian, what are you doing here?" He looked around nervously, as if he feared someone was watching us. Then he came closer and spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Mrs. Thompson, listen to me carefully. Do not get in the car when it arrives. Take a taxi. It is a matter of life or death. You will understand when you see who is in it." My heart began to pound. The expression on Sebastian's face was not a joke or an exaggeration. It was genuine fear mixed with urgency. "What are you talking about? Who is coming?" I asked, feeling my hands grip the shopping bags tighter. Sebastian glanced over my shoulder and his expression tensed even more. "I do not have time to explain everything now, Mrs. Thompson. Just trust me, as I trusted you when you helped me. Please, take a taxi, go to a public place, and when you get home, do not act as if anything is wrong. Watch, listen. The answers are closer than you imagine." Before I could respond, Sebastian discreetly pointed toward the other end of the parking lot. "The car is coming. Please, do as I say. We will see each other soon." And with that, he quickly got into his car and drove away, leaving me standing on the curb, confused and scared. I looked where he had pointed and indeed saw Henry's black sedan approaching. The new chauffeur was driving with that impeccable precision my husband demanded. But now, after Sebastian's words, that familiar car suddenly seemed threatening. My mind was racing. What could all this mean? Why was Sebastian warning me not to get into my own car? And what did he mean by "you will see who is in it"? The car stopped in front of me. The chauffeur got out to help me with my bags, as he always did, but this time, for the first time in months, I really looked at him. He was a man in his 30s, with hard features and an evasive gaze. He had never seemed particularly friendly, but Henry had always said that efficiency was what mattered, not likability. "Thank you, but that will not be necessary," I said, my voice attempting to sound firm. "I have decided to stay a little longer. You can go back. I will take a taxi later." The chauffeur looked at me with obvious surprise. "Are you sure, Mrs. Thompson?" "Mr. Thompson specifically asked me not to keep you waiting." "I am sure. Tell my husband something came up at the last minute, a friend I ran into here." The man hesitated for a moment, as if considering insisting, but finally nodded. He put my bags back in the trunk and handed them to me. "As you wish, ma'am." I watched him drive away, my heart still racing. Had I done the right thing, or was I letting paranoia get the best of me? But something in Sebastian's voice, in his eyes, told me this was real. He had saved me from something, though I still did not understand what. I hailed a cab and asked the driver to take me to a coffee shop downtown, far from my neighborhood. I needed time to think, to process what had just happened. As the taxi made its way through the city streets, I began to mentally review the last few months. Was there something strange I had not noticed? Some sign that something was wrong? Henry had been more distant than ever, if that was even possible. He spent more time in his office, came home late, and when he was present, his mind seemed to be elsewhere. But that was nothing new. We had been living like strangers under the same roof for years. My children had not been very present either. Marshall, my eldest son at 38, worked at his father's company. Or at least, I thought he did. It had been weeks since we had spoken beyond brief texts and hurried calls where he always seemed to be in a rush to hang up. Diana, my 35-year-old daughter, had moved to another city 5 years ago after getting married. Her calls had also become increasingly sparse. She was always busy with her own family, with her commitments. I was another obligation on her list, not a priority. I had gotten used to that loneliness, or so I thought. But deep down, there was always a part of me that hoped something would change, that my children would remember they had a mother, that Henry would remember he had a wife who was more than a decorative accessory. I arrived at the coffee shop and ordered a tea. My hands trembled slightly as I held the cup. Sebastian's words echoed in my mind. "You will understand when you see who is in it." Who was he referring to? The chauffeur? Someone else? And above all, why did that person represent a danger to me? I took out my phone and saw several messages from Henry asking why I had not come back in the car, why I had decided to stay. His messages had that controlling tone I knew so well, disguised as concern. I ran into an old friend, decided to have coffee with her. "I will be home in a few hours," I replied, lying with an ease that surprised me. As I waited for his response, I looked around the coffee shop. Young couples laughing together, groups of friends sharing stories, an elderly woman reading quietly in a corner. All these people seemed to have something I had lost long ago, genuine connection with other human beings. When had I stopped having real friends? When had I allowed my life to be reduced to being Henry Thompson's wife, the absent mother of Marshall and Diana, the woman who existed on the fringes of others' lives? The phone vibrated with Henry's reply. "Fine. Do not be too late." He did not even ask who I was with, nor did he show any curiosity. He just gave me permission to be late to my own home, as if I were a teenager needing his approval. I spent nearly 2 hours in that coffee shop, sipping tea and staring out the window, my mind endlessly turning. Finally, as the sun began to set, I decided it was time to go home, but not before doing something I had not done in years: calling my children. I dialed Marshall's number first. After several rings, he answered with that hurried voice that had become his signature. "Mom, I am busy." "Did something happen? I cannot call my own son without something having to have happened," I asked, feeling sadness mixed with frustration in my voice. There was a brief pause. "You are right. Sorry, it is just that there is so much work. Dad is pushing on several new projects. How are things at the company?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Good, good. Everything is under control." His response was automatic, rehearsed. "Mom, did you really call just to ask about work? I just wanted to hear your voice, son. We have not really talked in weeks. I know, Mom. I am sorry. It is just time. You know how it is." It was always time. The time that was never enough. The time that pushed them away from me. The time that turned families into collections of strangers with the same last name. Marshall. Is everything okay? I mean, really okay. Not just at work. Another pause. This one longer. For a moment, I thought he might open up, that he would let me into his real life, but then I heard voices in the background, and his tone changed. "Mom, I have to go. I will call you later." "Yes." And he hung up before I could reply. I stared at the phone, feeling that familiar emptiness in my chest. Then I dialed Diana's number. This time, she did not even answer. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, sweetheart. It is Mom. Just calling to see how you are. How are the kids? Call me when you can." "Yes. I love you." I put the phone away and paid my bill. It was time to face whatever was waiting for me at home. The taxi dropped me off in front of the gates of our property. The house looked as imposing as ever, with its perfectly manicured gardens and elegant facade. But for me, it had long ceased to be a home. It was just a structure where I existed, where I spent my days waiting for something that never came. I entered carefully, remembering Sebastian's words. "Watch, listen." Henry was in his study, as expected. I could hear his voice through the closed door, talking on the phone with someone. His tone was all business, the one he used when he was negotiating something important. I went up to our bedroom and left the shopping bags on the bed. As I unpacked mechanically, my mind kept processing everything that had happened. What did Sebastian want me to see? What danger had he saved me from? That night, during dinner, I watched Henry with new eyes. He ate in silence, checking his phone occasionally, completely oblivious to my presence across the table. After 42 years together, we had perfected the art of ignoring each other. "How was your day?" I asked, breaking the silence. Henry looked up, surprised by the question. "Busy, as always. And yours?" "Interesting. Very interesting, in fact." He looked at me more closely now. "Oh? What was so interesting about going to the mall? The people you meet when you least expect it," I said carefully, watching his reaction. Henry frowned slightly. "What are you talking about, Blondie?" "Just that sometimes the people we least expect are the ones who show us the most loyalty, the ones who really care about us when everyone else is too busy." "You are speaking in riddles," he said with a hint of irritation. "If you have something to say it clearly." But I did not. Instead, I smiled softly. "I am just reflecting on life, Henry, on the choices we make and the consequences they have." He looked at me for another moment, as if trying to decipher a code. Then, evidently deciding it was not worth the effort, he returned his attention to his phone. Tonight, as Henry slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. My mind kept replaying the day's details: Sebastian's warning, the new chauffeur's strange look, the distance from my children. And then something clicked in my mind, a conversation I had accidentally overheard weeks ago. Henry on the phone in his study, mentioning something about transfers and overseas accounts, in a tone that had struck me as unusual at the time. I also remembered how Marshall had been acting lately, more nervous, more evasive. And Diana, who had never been close to her father, had suddenly started calling him more frequently, something I had noticed from the incoming calls on Henry's phone when he left it forgotten in the living room. Was it possible that something was happening that I, in my peripheral existence in this family, had not noticed? Something involving my husband, my children, and from which I had been deliberately excluded? Sebastian's words echoed in my mind again. You will understand when you see who is in it. And suddenly, with a clarity that took my breath away, I began to understand. The danger was not from the chauffeur. The danger was much closer. It was in my own family. The following days were a painful revelation. I began to watch as Sebastian had advised, and what I saw broke my heart in ways I never imagined possible. I realized that Henry and Marshall had conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. I noticed how they exchanged meaningful glances during dinners, as if sharing secrets I was not meant to know. And most painfully, I saw how my own son avoided my gaze when I asked simple questions about his life. One afternoon, while Henry was at a meeting out of the house, I went into his study. It was not something I normally did. That space was his private kingdom, his sanctuary where I was not welcome. But that afternoon, something compelled me to cross that invisible line. Documents were scattered across his desk. I started reading them, my hands trembling slightly. They were legal papers, contracts, bank statements, and the more I read, the clearer the horrifying picture became. Henry was moving assets. Large amounts of money were being transferred to offshore accounts. Properties were being re-registered under the names of shell companies. And most devastatingly, my name was nowhere to be found. I was being systematically erased from everything we had built together over more than 4 decades. My hands dropped the papers when I heard the sound of a car in the driveway. I quickly left the study, my heart pounding. I took refuge in the kitchen, pretending to make tea when Henry came in. "Blondie, where are you?" His voice echoed through the house. "Here, in the kitchen," I replied, surprised at how steady my voice sounded despite the turmoil inside me. Henry appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, his face showing the day's fatigue. "We need to talk," he said, and something in his tone made me understand that this moment had been coming, that he had been waiting for the right time. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "About us. About this marriage. About the future." I sat down slowly in one of the kitchen chairs, bracing myself for what was to come. "I have been thinking a lot lately," Henry began, not sitting down, remaining standing as if giving a business presentation. "We are different people now, Blondie. There is nothing left that binds us, except for habit and a piece of paper." 42 years of marriage is more than a piece of paper," I said softly. 42 years of coexistence, he corrected me. "Let's not kid ourselves. We have not been real husband and wife for years. We are just roommates." His words, though painful, were not entirely untrue, but there was something else in his tone, something calculated and cold that made me understand this conversation was not about feelings, it was about strategy. "What are you really trying to say, Henry?" He took a deep breath. "I want a divorce, Blondie. I think we both deserve to be honest about what this has become and move on with our lives." There it was, the truth finally in the air between us. But I knew there was more, much more, behind this sudden need for honesty. "I see. And the children, Marshall and Diana, do they know about this decision of yours?" The slight hesitation in his eyes confirmed everything. "They will understand. They are adults. They know these marriages cannot be forced to continue when they no longer work. They will understand," I repeated, letting the question hang in the air. "Or they already understand because they already know." Henry looked at me more closely now, as if reassessing how much I really knew. "Blondie, do not make this harder than it has to be. You can stay in the house for a while as you make other arrangements. I will be fair with the division of assets." Fair. The word left my mouth with a bitterness that surprised me. Fair, like you have been fair moving assets into accounts where my name does not appear? Fair, like you have been fair involving our son in your plans without telling me a thing? Fair like that, Henry? His expression changed instantly. The mask of civility fell, revealing something harder underneath. "You have been snooping through my things. This is my home too. Or at least it was until you decided it was not anymore. Blondie, You do not know what you are talking about. Those are complex business matters that you cannot understand. Do not insult me by treating me like I am a fool, I interrupted, my voice rising for the first time in years. I have been your wife for over 4 decades. I have been invisible, yes. I have been ignored, yes. But I am not stupid. Henry clenched his jaw. I am going to get the best lawyers. I suggest you do the same. This does not have to be ugly, Blondie. We can be civilized. Civilized, I repeated with a joyless laugh. Like you have been civilized, planning all this behind my back? Like you have been civilized, involving our children in your scheme to leave me with nothing? No one is leaving you with nothing. Do not be dramatic. And Diana? Or is just Marshall enough of an accomplice for you? Henry did not answer, but his silence was answer enough. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my fragmented thoughts and broken heart. I sat there for hours, watching the daylight slowly fade. That night I could not sleep. I stayed in the guest room, unable to share a bed with a man who had betrayed me so profoundly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my children's faces, wondering how they had come to this, how the family I thought I had built had become a conspiracy against me. The next morning, I received a text from Sebastian. We need to talk. There are things you need to know. The Corner Cafe, 10 a.m. Please, come alone. I arrived early, desperately needing answers. Sebastian was already there, sitting at a table in the back with a folder in front of him. Mrs. Thompson, he greeted me with the respect he had always shown. Thank you for coming. Sebastian, I need you to tell me what is going on. How did you know about the car? What was I supposed to see? He took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say something difficult. 3 months ago, after getting a job as a driver for another company, I ran into Mr. Marshall by chance. He was at a restaurant with your husband and several lawyers. I should not have listened, but I recognized their voices and unintentionally drew closer. What did you hear? My voice was barely a whisper. They were talking about you. About how to make sure that in the divorce you would not have access to the bulk of the assets. I heard Mr. Thompson say that you had only been a wife, that you had never really contributed to the company, that everything was thanks to his work and effort. Tears began to stream down my cheeks. Hearing it from Sebastian gave an undeniable reality to what I had begun to suspect. And Marshall, my son, said nothing in my defense? Sebastian looked down. I am sorry, Mrs. Thompson. Mr. Marshall was in agreement. He even suggested additional ways to protect the family's assets. The word family sounded like a cruel joke. What family? One that conspired against its own mother. Is there more? Sebastian continued, opening the folder. After that day, I started to do some digging on my own. I have some contacts, people who owe me favors, and I found out something you need to know. He showed me documents, photographs, records. The more I saw, the clearer the full picture of the betrayal became. Henry had been planning this for over a year. He had moved properties into the names of companies controlled by him and Marshall. He had transferred funds from joint accounts to personal ones. He had even sold investments I thought we still had, putting the money where I could not access it. And most devastatingly, there were documents showing that Diana was also aware. My daughter, who had been avoiding me, was not innocent in this. She had signed as a witness on several of the property transfer documents. But there is something else, he said softly. The day I saw you at the mall, I had been following Mr. Thompson's new driver. I had been suspicious of him for weeks. What kind of suspicions? That man is not just a chauffeur, Mrs. Thompson. He is a private investigator. His real job was to follow you, to document your movements, to look for anything that could be used against you in the divorce. My blood ran cold. They were investigating me, my own family, looking for anything that could justify giving me less in the settlement, an affair, excessive spending, any behavior they could paint as inappropriate. But I have not done anything, I said, my voice breaking. For 42 years, I have been a faithful wife, a devoted mother. I have dedicated my entire life to this family. I know, Mrs. Thompson. That is why I warned you. That day, the investigator was going to follow you, to take pictures of our meeting, of the previous times we had met when I gave you the money. They were going to use that to imply you were having an inappropriate relationship, that you were diverting family funds. I was speechless. The depth of the betrayal was overwhelming. Why? I finally asked. Why would they do this? I am their mother, his wife. What did I do to deserve this? Sebastian took my hand gently. You did nothing wrong, Mrs. Thompson. This is about greed, about selfishness. But you need to protect yourself. You need to get a lawyer, a good one. And you need to do it now, before they make their next move. He was right. For the first time in my life, I needed to stop being the submissive wife and the self-sacrificing mother. I needed to fight for myself because clearly no one else would. There is something else you should know, Sebastian added, pulling another document from the folder. When Mr. Thompson fired me, it was not just because of the airport incident. It was because I had seen something I should not have seen. What did you see? I saw him going into a hotel with a woman who was not you. Not just once, but several times over the last 2 years. I never said anything. I thought it was not my place. But when he fired me, I understood that he knew that I knew, and he wanted me out before I could say anything. So, on top of the financial betrayal, there was infidelity. It should not have surprised me, but somehow it did. After all these years of a cold, distant marriage, a part of me had still held a small hope that we at least owed each other mutual respect. That hope died in that moment. Do you have proof of that? I asked, my voice now firmer. Sebastian smiled sadly. I have dates, locations, and some contacts at those hotels who can confirm. I thought you might need them one day. Thank you, Sebastian. Not just for this, but for everything, for being more loyal to me than my own family. You helped me when no one else did, Mrs. Thompson. This is the least I can do. I left that coffee shop a changed woman. The pain was still there, deep and throbbing, but now there was something else, determination. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I hired a divorce attorney, a woman named Patricia Miller, who had a reputation for being tough but fair. When I showed her all the documentation Sebastian had gathered, her eyes lit up with a mix of professional outrage and resolve. Mrs. Thompson, she said as she reviewed the papers, your husband made a serious mistake in underestimating you. We have enough evidence here to prove concealment of assets, which judges do not take lightly. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small flicker of hope. But what weighed on me most was not the legal battle ahead, it was the pain of my children's betrayal. It was one thing for my marriage to Henry to have died years ago. It was another thing entirely to discover that the children to whom I had dedicated my life had turned their backs on me for money. I decided to confront them. I needed to hear from their own mouths why they had done this, why I, their mother, had been worth so little to them. I called Marshall first. I asked him to come to the house, that I needed to speak with him urgently. His tone was cautious when he agreed to come that afternoon. When he arrived, I met him in the living room. He looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes as he sat on the couch where he had played so many times as a child. "Mom, what did you want to talk about?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I want to talk about why my own son has been helping his father steal from me." The word steal made him react. "We are not stealing from you. It is complicated, Mom. It is business." "Business," I repeated, feeling anger rise in my chest. "Stripping your mother of what is rightfully hers is business? Mom, you do not understand. Dad built that empire. You never worked, never contributed." "I never contributed?" My voice rose despite my intention to stay calm. "Marshall, I raised 2 children. I organized every social event that helped your father build contacts and close deals. I kept this home running so he could focus on his work. Does that not count as a contribution?" "It is not the same as really working," he said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. "Do you know what hurts the most, son? It is not the money. It is that you, my firstborn, the child I nursed, whom I cared for when he was sick, whom I helped with every school assignment, whom I supported in every decision. You looked me in the eye for months, knowing what they were planning, and said nothing. I saw his eyes moisten, but he blinked quickly, refusing to show emotion. Dad said it was for the best, that you would be fine. that you would have enough to live comfortably. And you believed him? Or did you just not care because your inheritance would be protected? The silence that followed was my answer. You know what I discovered, Marshall? That your father has been moving assets not only to shield them from me in the divorce, but also to ensure the majority goes to you. Diana gets much less, but I suppose that does not matter to you either, does it? Marshall turned pale. I did not know that. You did not want to know. It is easier that way. Easier to tell yourself that Dad knows best, that this is just business, that Mom will be fine. Easier than admitting you are participating in something profoundly unfair and cruel. Mom, Tell me one thing, Marshall. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if, when you were a child and got sick in the middle of the night, I had said, "This is not my problem, it is just business"? Or when you cried because other kids bullied you at school and I spent hours comforting you, what if I had said, "This does not contribute to my future, so I do not care"? Tears finally rolled down his cheeks. I am sorry, Mom. Are you sorry, or are you sorry you got caught? He did not answer. I want you to leave my house, I said with a calm I did not feel, and I want you to tell your sister that I need to speak with her too. Marshall stood up slowly. At the door, he turned back to me. Mom, Go, Marshall. Now. When he left, I allowed myself to cry. Not silent, restrained tears, but deep sobs that came from the depths of my being. I cried for the son I had lost, for the family I never truly had, for the years I had dedicated to people who, in the end, saw me only as an obstacle to their plans. Diana arrived the next day. Unlike Marshall, she came in with a defensive attitude, ready for a confrontation. Marshall told me what you said to him, she began before I could speak. You are being unfair, Mom. Dad has worked hard his entire life. Your father had an affair, I interrupted. For at least 2 years. While I maintained this house, while I faithfully waited for him to come home every night, he was with another woman. Diana stopped, clearly not expecting that information. And you two, I continued, my own children, conspired with him to ensure that when he left me, I would have nothing. Not because it was fair, but because it was convenient for all of you. Mom, do you ever wonder, Diana, why you grew so distant from me these last few years? Why you stopped calling, stopped visiting? Was it because you knew what was coming and did not want to face what that said about you? My daughter fell silent, her face showing an internal battle. I taught you to be strong, to be independent, but I never taught you to be cruel. You learned that on your own, Diana, and you will have to live with that. Diana sat down slowly on the couch, her defensive posture crumbling to reveal something more vulnerable underneath. For the first time in years, I saw my daughter truly see me, not as an obstacle or an obligation, but as a person. Mom, her voice broke. I did not want it to be like this, but it was, I replied, sitting across from her. And you chose to participate. No one forced you to sign those documents, to keep your father's secrets. But Dad said that if I did not, if I was not on his side, he would cut me off too. He said there is no room for sentiment in business, that I had to choose to be with the family or against it. And it never occurred to you that I am family too? That your mother also deserves loyalty? Tears began to stream down Diana's face. I have kids, Mom. I have to think about their future, their education, everything they will need. And Mark, my husband, does not make that much. Dad's inheritance is important to us, so you sold me out for financial security. It was not like that, she exclaimed, but her voice lacked conviction. I thought, Dad said you would be okay, that you would have enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. And that made it okay to strip me of what is rightfully mine? Diana, it is not just about the money. It is about my own family betraying me. It is about the fact that for months, every time you looked at me, every time you avoided my calls, it was because you knew they were setting this trap for me. Diana covered her face with her hands, sobbing. For a moment, I felt the urge to comfort her, to hug her as I had so many times when she was a little girl, but I stopped myself. She needed to feel the weight of her actions, not be rescued from the consequences. Do you know what is most ironic about all this? I said softly. I spent my whole life teaching you to be good, honest, loyal. I taught you that family is the most important thing, and in the end, you learned the exact opposite. You learned that family only matters when it is convenient, that loyalty has a price, and that it is okay to betray someone who loves you if there is enough money involved. "We are not bad people, Mom," Diana whispered through her tears. "No, you are not, but you did bad things, and that is a truth you will have to live with." My daughter looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Can you ever forgive us?" The question caught me by surprise. Not because I had not thought about forgiveness, but because I did not expect it to come so soon, so easily, as if forgiveness were something that could be requested and received without the hard work of redemption. "I do not know, Diana. Honestly, I do not know. Forgiveness is not something you give just because someone asks for it. It is something that is earned, that is built on real change and genuine remorse. And so far, all I see is regret for getting caught, not for what you did. I do regret it, Mom. I really do." "Then prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Talk to your father. Tell him this is wrong, that you will not be a part of it anymore. Testify on my behalf if you have to. Show your children that their grandmother is not someone who can be discarded when she is no longer convenient." Diana nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "I will, I promise you." "The promises from this family have proven to be worth very little," I said sadly, "but I hope this time is different." After Diana left, I was alone in that big, empty house. For the first time in decades, the silence did not feel oppressive. It felt liberating. It was the silence of decisions made, of the truth finally exposed, of a woman who had stopped being invisible. That night, Henry came home late. He found me in the living room, waiting for him. "We need to talk," I told him. "We have nothing left to talk about, Blondie. Let the lawyers handle everything." "Oh, but we do have things to talk about. I want you to know that I know everything. The offshore accounts, the transferred properties, the woman at the hotel, the private investigator, everything." I saw his face tense. "I do not know what you are talking about. Please, Henry. The time for lies is over. I have documentation of everything, and I have witnesses. What you did was not just immoral. In many respects, it was illegal. If you try anything, I will destroy your reputation," he said coldly. "You can make me look like what? A loyal wife who was betrayed? A mother who dedicated her life to her family only to be stripped of everything by them? Go ahead, Henry. Tell the world that story. Let's see who comes out looking worse." For the first time in our years together, I saw something akin to fear in his eyes. "I do not want to destroy you," I continued. "That would be stooping to your level. But I want what is mine. I want what is legally mine after 42 years of marriage. And if you have to choose between doing the right thing voluntarily or being forced to do it by a judge who will see evidence of your infidelity and concealment of assets, I suggest you choose wisely." Henry looked at me for a long time. I could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing his options. "I will talk to my lawyers," he finally said. "You do that. In the meantime, I am moving into a hotel. I cannot be in this house anymore. It is not a home. It never was. It was just a beautiful prison where I spent decades of my life serving people who never valued me. Blondie, do not—" I cut him off. "You do not have the right to say my name with that tone, as if it still means something to you. You made me a stranger, Henry. Now live with that choice." I went upstairs to pack my things, feeling his eyes on me as I climbed the stairs. In my room, as I folded clothes and gathered belongings, I found myself looking at the photographs on my nightstand. Pictures from our wedding, of smiling young children, of birthdays and celebrations, an entire life captured in frozen moments that now seemed to belong to someone else. I took only one photograph, one of my children when they were small, before the world had hardened them, before they learned that money was worth more than love. I kept it not as a memory of what they were, but as a reminder of what was lost. That night, I slept in a modest but clean hotel. The bed was smaller, the sheets were not the quality I was used to, but I slept better than I had in years. Because for the first time in decades, I fell asleep being true to myself. The next morning, I received a text from Sebastian. "How are you, Mrs. Thompson? I just wanted to remind you that you are not alone in this." I smiled as I read his words. How ironic that the most loyal person in my life turned out to be someone my husband had fired without compassion. Life had a strange way of showing you who really mattered. I replied, "I am okay, Sebastian. Stronger than I thought I could be. Thank you for everything." And it was true. I was okay. Not happy yet, not completely healed, but I was on my way. And for the first time in a long time, that path was mine to choose. The following months were a process of transformation I never imagined possible at 67. I had always believed that at my age, a person was already formed, that profound changes were a thing of the past. But I discovered that it is never too late to rediscover yourself, to find strengths you did not know you had. The legal process was long and sometimes painful. Patricia, my lawyer, turned out to be more than just legal counsel. She became an ally, someone who constantly reminded me of my own worth when I forgot it myself. Thanks to the evidence Sebastian had gathered and my own documentation, we managed to prove Henry's concealment of assets. In the end, the settlement was fair. I did not get everything, but I got enough to live with dignity, to start over. Henry had to face the consequences of his actions, not only legally, but socially as well. His reputation in business circles suffered when the truth came out about how he had tried to dispossess his wife of 42 years. But the most important thing was not the money or the legal victory. It was what I discovered about myself in the process. I bought a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was not the mansion I was used to, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture I chose, every color I painted, every decorative decision was mine and mine alone. For the first time in my adult life, I was living in a space that reflected who I was, not who I was expected to be. I took up things I had abandoned decades ago. I started painting again, something I loved in my youth but gave up when I got married because Henry thought it was a frivolous hobby. I enrolled in literature classes at the local university, surrounding myself with people of all ages who shared a love for words and stories. I even started volunteering at a shelter for families in crisis, helping women who, like me, were rebuilding their lives. Sebastian became a genuine friend. We had lunch together every couple of weeks, sharing stories, laughing at life's ironies. His family welcomed me with a warmth my own family had never shown. His children called me Aunt Eleanor, and his wife invited me to family celebrations. I discovered that family is not just blood, it is the people who choose to stay, who choose to value you. As for Marshall, the relationship remained fractured. He tried to reach out a few times after the divorce, but his apologies always seemed shallow, motivated more by guilt than genuine remorse. I maintained a cordial distance. I did not close the door on him completely, but I did not pretend everything was okay either. He would have to do the real work of rebuilding trust, and so far, he had not shown he was willing to do it. Diana, however, was different. 3 months after our last conversation at the house, she showed up at my new apartment. She arrived unannounced, her eyes red from crying. "Mom," she said when I opened the door, "I need to talk to you." "Really talk." I let her in. I made tea, and we sat in my small living room, so different from the grand spaces where we had shared so many empty conversations in the past. "I have been in therapy," Diana began, her hands trembling slightly as she held her cup. "Ever since we talked. At first, I went because I could not sleep, because the guilt was consuming me. But I have learned so much about myself, about why I did what I did." I listened in silence, giving her the space to continue. "I realized I spent my whole life trying to win Dad's approval. He was always so tough, so demanding, and I thought that if I did what he wanted, if I was on his side, he would finally see me. I would finally be enough for him. And were you?" I asked softly. Diana shook her head, tears starting to fall. "No, I never was. Even after everything I did, after choosing him over you, he is still the same cold, distant man. And now I realize that all I managed to do was lose the one person who truly loved me unconditionally. You." Her words touched me deeply, but I did not rush to comfort her. She needed to feel this completely, to process the pain of her choices. "I have talked to my children," she continued. "I told them the truth about what I did, about how I treated their grandmother. And you know what they asked me? They asked me why I would choose money over you. And I did not have a good answer, Mom. Because there is not a good answer, Diana. No, let me finish, please. She took a deep breath. I want you to know that I testified. I told your lawyer everything I knew about Dad's asset movements. I gave her access to documents I had. And I have cut off contact with Dad completely. Because I realized that if I keep being his daughter in the way he expects, I can never be the person I want to be, the mother my children deserve, the daughter you always deserved. Tears were now streaming freely down my face. Now, I do not expect you to forgive me immediately, Diana said. I know it does not work like that. I know forgiveness is something earned over time, with consistent actions, not just words. But I want you to know that I am going to do the work. I am going to be better. And if you give me the chance, however small, I want to start rebuilding our relationship. Not the one we had before, because that one was broken a long time ago, but a new one, based on honesty and mutual respect. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. I saw something in her eyes I had not seen before. Genuine humility, true remorse, and above all, a real desire to change. Diana, I said finally, I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate that you have taken real steps to make things right. But you are right about one thing. Forgiveness takes time, and trust takes even longer. She nodded, accepting my words without defense. However, I continued, I am willing to try. I do not promise it will be easy. I do not promise we will go back to what we were. But I do promise to be open to the possibility of building something new between us. Diana stood up and slowly approached, asking with her eyes if she could hug me. I nodded, and for the first time in years, I truly hugged my daughter. It was not a perfect or completely healing embrace, but it was honest, and that was a start. In the months that followed, Diana kept her word. She came to visit weekly, bringing her children. We talked for real, not just about trivialities, but about real things, her struggles, her fears, her hopes, and I shared mine as well. For the first time, we had a relationship of equals, not of an all-knowing mother and a compliant daughter. Sebastian would laugh when I told him about these visits. You see, Mrs. Thompson, sometimes what looks like an ending is just a new beginning. He was right. My life at 67 was completely different from how I had imagined it. I was not married to the man with whom I had shared over 4 decades. I did not live in the house that had been my home for so long. I did not have the perfect family I once dreamed of. But I had something better. I had authenticity. I had the freedom to be myself without apology. I had genuine friendships. I had a daughter who was doing the hard work of becoming a better person. And I had peace. One afternoon, while I was painting in my small makeshift studio, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Henry, Blondie. His voice sounded different, softer, less certain. Can we talk? We are talking now, I replied non-committally. I mean, in person. There are things I need to say. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain the safe distance I had built. But another part, the part that had learned that closure sometimes requires difficult conversations, agreed. We met at a neutral cafe, none of the places we had frequented together in the past. Henry looked older. The months since the divorce had not been kind to him. I wanted to apologize, he began without preamble, for everything. For the way I treated you during our marriage, for the betrayal, for all of it. What changed? I asked directly. Diana stopped talking to me, he said, his voice cracking. Marshall, he talks to me, but it is different now. He looks at me with something that looks a lot like disappointment, and I am alone, Blondie. Alone with my money and my company, and I realize that none of those things will hold me when I am dying. His words moved me, but I did not rush to offer comfort. I spent my whole life building an empire, he continued, but I neglected to build a family. And now, when I finally see it, it is too late. It is not too late to change, Henry, I said softly. But it is also not my job to save you from the consequences of your choices. That is something you have to do for yourself. I know. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, and that if I could go back in time, but you cannot, I interrupted gently. None of us can. We can only decide what to do with the time we have left. We said our goodbyes cordially, with no promises of future friendship, no pretense that all was forgiven, but it had been important. He had taken the first step toward taking responsibility, and I had closed that chapter with dignity. That evening, standing on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city lights, I reflected on everything I had been through. 67 years of life, 42 of them dedicated to a marriage that ultimately revealed itself to be empty. I could have felt that I had wasted my life, but I did not feel that way. Because everything, even the pain, had brought me to this moment, to this version of myself, who was stronger, wiser, and more authentic. I had learned that it is never too late to reclaim yourself, that forgiveness is as much for the giver as for the receiver, and that true family is built on actions, not blood. I thought of the women at the shelter where I volunteered, each rebuilding her life from the ashes. I thought of Diana, doing the hard work of becoming a better person. I thought of Sebastian, whose loyalty had saved me from losing everything. And I thought of myself, of the woman I was and the woman I was becoming. Life, I realized, is not about perfect endings. It is about brave new beginnings, about the will to keep growing even when it seems impossible, and about finding beauty in the cracks that pain leaves behind. I went back inside, picked up my paintbrush, and continued working on the canvas I had started that morning. It was a sunrise, the colors mixing and transforming, darkness giving way to light, just like me.